Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let me try that again. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is the International Peace Coalition. This is our 142nd meeting that we've had consecutively. Thank you all so much for joining us. Those who have been veterans of this process over the last 142 weeks, and those who are brand new. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. I'd like to remind everyone about why we have created this forum 142 weeks ago, which was to unite the international peace movement. Whatever philosophy you come from, whatever nationality you're from, language you speak, religion you believe in, you are welcome here. And if your mission is to create true peace in the world, then we absolutely want to collaborate and make this happen as quickly as possible. And I'm sure many people who have been in the know over the many years that lots of enemies to this mission have tried to keep us separated and keep us from discussing and coordinating our activities. So we want to break through that. So please take a moment to share this invitation, whether you're on over YouTube, Rumble, X, or on Zoom. Share this invitation with your organizations, with your friends, your reasonable enemies, and be part of the discussion today. We often have on a number of panelists in the opening portion, and then we open up during the second half for a dialogue with the audience. We are going to have a slightly different um, arrangement today, just because Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche is unavailable, but she has sent in a video to brief us thoroughly in the beginning, and then we'll continue on with our agenda. So why don't we pull up the video from Helga? She is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition.
Good day. Hello to all of you, wherever you may be. I think the world is holding its breath, or it should do, because we are threatened with an incredible escalation of the strategic situation, because President Trump has announced that he will make the decision to launch a new military strike against Iran within the next 10 days. However, it could be as early as today or this weekend, because many of the American media said that, within the next 3 days, such a decision could be made. And the most biggest armada ever has massed with 2 aircraft carriers and many, many fighter jets and other military equipment in the region. So it is almost ready to go. Now, if that happens, all hell may break loose, because Iran has just concluded, together with Russia, a military maneuver in the Straits of Hormuz and in the Gulf of Oman, and that is where 20% of the world's oil is passing through on a daily basis. So if that would be cut off, it could trigger an enormous economic crisis in the whole world, a financial blowout for that matter as well. So Iran, obviously, for whom this is an existential question, has already announced that if they are attacked, they will answer with a massive strike against US facilities in the region, maybe Israel or both. And, this could lead to unforeseeable consequences. So on the table is the question of that Iran should not be allowed to enrich nuclear material at all, which is totally the red line, because Iran completely justified says that they have the right for peaceful purposes for enrichment of uranium like every other country. They still have the fatwa that they do not want, for religious reasons, to build nuclear weapons. That is being assumed all the time, but it's actually not factually true. Then naturally, Iran is supposed to give up support for the so-called axis of resistance, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, which they in all likelihood will and cannot do either, and naturally the disarmament of Hamas. So there are many demands which, make the outcome of such negotiations extremely iffy because, for Iran, there are several red lines involved. Now, if there is an escalation, it may throw the world into an uncontrollable escalation, because then, if Iran strikes very hard back with its ballistic missiles, the question is, will the use of nuclear weapons on the side of Israel come into play? And that could set off an escalation on a global scale where, the end result could be the end of mankind. And we should be absolutely aware of that. Now, what is happening here right now is an unbelievable portraying of media lies. I mean, Iran has done absolutely nothing to cause this, because the entire Western narrative about the recent killings of many people in Iran, the way the West is portraying it is basically that it was the evil regime in Tehran, while the evidence that this was a regime change operation, which was openly claimed by Scott Bessent in a US Senate hearing, that this was supposedly, quote, economic statecraft on the part of the United States, using a run on the bank, using the long-term effect of the sanctions, forcing the Central Bank of Iran to pump liquidity to prevent a blowout. This led to inflation. The people naturally could not bear these hardships. But it was an effort from the outside, then supported with the influx of armed terrorist forces. And Pompeo even made a tweet where he said every demonstrator had a Mossad agent on its side. It's generally recognized that the CIA was heavily involved. So it is an unbelievable situation, but it is part of the new reality which has emerged in the recent period, according to the doctrine, might makes right. In other words, the powerful do whatever they can, and those who are less powerful have to suffer the consequence. Now, that obviously is a situation which is throwing the whole world into chaos. And if this strike against Iran occurs, which hopefully still can be prevented, it would throw potentially the entire Middle East into chaos. Can you imagine if there is no more unified government in Iran? You have a balkanization, new terrorism, new refugee waves. So it would be at the absolute, disadvantage of naturally the Iranians, the entire region, Europe, which would be confronted with new influxes of refugees. It's an insane operation, and I think the international community is really called upon to help Iran to prove that this Western narrative is not what actually happened. Because if we do not correct these kinds of things, the next one will follow. Now, obviously, the statement was made at the occasion of the first meeting of Trump's peace board, so-called, and it is noted, that there was not one sub-Sahara nation invited in it, and there are now African authors who refer to the fact that this confirms the mindset of President Trump, who in January 2012, when he was asked by a congressman, basically, said that the US should not accept so many immigrants from these, quote, shithole countries, referring to Africa. Trump denied that he ever said that, but at a rally in 2025 in Pennsylvania, he repeated it and said, why don't we have more immigrants from Norway and not from such filthy, disgusting places like Somalia? So I'm afraid this shows a colonial mindset, to be polite. And the entire idea of the Board of Peace, while it is clearly stated it's supposed to replace the United Nations, is not trying to reform the UN in a way where it would be made function. but to create a parallel organization which consolidates the rule of the powerful. Now, the other major earthquake which is shaking the world situation is naturally the unfolding of the Epstein scandal, where yesterday, the headlines were dominated by the arrest of formerly Prince Andrew, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who was arrested in his residence because of the sexual misbehavior and sexual crimes he committed, but because he gave away confidential information when he was in charge of UK trade affairs to Epstein, obviously part of some larger illegal deals. So then also the more names are coming out. Many of the mentors of Epstein, like the billionaire Les Wexner, he owns the Victoria's Secret underwear vendor. There's a lot coming out now in terms of he was being questioned, and then he distanced himself and said this conman, he had nothing to do with it. But I think Thomas Matthey, the congressman, is correct when he said this is bigger than Watergate because it involves decades of cover-up. And I think one has to realize that it is not just the ongoing, year-long, decade-long raping and misusing of minors and girls and children for sexual, exploitation, form of modern slavery, but it is that mindset, which is that absolutely criminal mindset, which is what causes the same group of people to write IMF policies, denying countries access to credit, committing the use of AI in genocide in Gaza. I mean, it is the mindset of a class which has lost all moral compasses, and it's just, bestial is really an insight to the beasts, because I do not know of any animal which would engage in such a prolonged criminal behavior. So also naturally, what we have seen with Marco Rubio's speech in Munich, where he basically gave a speech which for some strange reason mistakenly was called more mild-mannered than the speech by J.D. Vance a year ago. But what he actually said, if you read between the lines, was an amazing reaffirmation of colonialism, because he said the 500 years until 1945 were all practically wonderful, because it was the spread of our system, which he completely mischaracterized in many parts. But basically, after 45, everything went wrong, obviously because of the emergence of communism as a major competitor to the United States. And then he told the Europeans, well, either you join, we can do this reaffirmation of dominance in the world together, or, basically, what is already stated in the new security strategy paper, regime change for Europe if they don't go along with the US perspective. Now, for Europe to do that would basically mean national suicide, because now Spiegel magazine, of all places, is running a story, so-called investigation result, that the CIA had very early knowledge about the plans to sabotage and blow up the Nord Stream pipelines, that they first gave green light, later supposedly changed that. But, so the story now is coming out first that it was supposedly Ukrainian hobby divers, then that was changed into special forces from Ukraine, then into elite troops from Ukraine. And we should not forget that the highest court in Germany, the BGH, had basically said that there is evidence that it was an operation by the Ukrainian state, initiated and as well as carried out. Now, the French magazine Le Monde Diplomatique basically reports that already before the second term of President Trump began, there was an interest coming from the United States to take over the Nord Stream pipelines and basically, keep the dominance over the European energy supply. Now, well, if you look at the Nord Stream sabotage, what it did accomplish was, on the one side, to sever Europe's ties with Russia, which was a long-stated geopolitical aim of the United States and the British, naturally, for geopolitical control, and to control entirely the European access to energy, so making Europe a full-fledged vessel. Now, the Chinese have made it very clear that when they suffered similar operations with the opium wars in the 19th century, and various territorial takeovers, they are committed to never ever allow again a century of humiliation, as they call it. Now, Europe seems to be happy in suffering such a not yet century, but decades of humiliation. And the big question is, can we evoke enough pride and backbone among the Europeans that they do not go along with such schemes? Because right now we are in a world dominated by might makes right. The law of the jungle is unfair to the jungle, because in the jungle nothing like that exists in terms of depravity. It's just, different animals have their own ways of life, and that's detriment to some animals' life, but there is no such thing as the present efforts of world domination, and also combined with the Epstein perversion would be visible. So we are in an obviously extremely dangerous situation, and this is why we are calling for the IPC and also for our recent initiative of January 12th that we need to absolutely put in earnest a completely different conception on the table, a new paradigm, a new security and development architecture, which absolutely must move the world away from geopolitics. Because as long as we think that there is a legitimate interest of one country or a group of countries against another one, that prescription to World War III is what is being acted out. This is why we need a new architecture which must take into account the interest of every single country for security and for development. For that reason, we will have a new conference on March 2nd, where you should organize as many people and institutions you can to participate, because it will be combined with the call to create a world movement of world citizens, of people who may be patriots in their own country, but at the same time also take the interest of the one humanity first. And it must be connected with a cultural renaissance, because we cannot allow that the degraded picture coming out of the Epstein-class environment, that should stand there for the human species, but that we have to absolutely go in the renaissance of the best traditions of all cultures, and hopefully have a dialogue among them, and in this way inspire a renaissance which will celebrate the dignity of man and the idea of man as a beautiful soul, as it was presented by Friedrich Schiller. So to this effort, I really invite you full-heartedly. Please join, become an activist of the world movement of world citizens.
Thank you very much, Helga, for sending that in. That was Mrs.
Muchas
Helga
gracias,
Zepp.
Helga, por enviarnos
in
este
Spanish.
informe.
You're in the wrong channel. Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Zepp-LaRouche, for sending that in to situate us in what's happening in the world. In the chat over the Zoom, I put the RSVP link for the March 2nd conference. You can check that out. You will receive a Zoom link upon your RSVP. And if you are on over YouTube or Rumble or any other broadcast, you can go to schillerinstitute.com, excuse me, to find that RSVP link. Pardon me. So we shall continue with our agenda. Next, we have Steve Starr, who is a leading nuclear weapons expert, a regular on the International Peace Coalition, and a very good person to scare the pants off of you on what's really happening and what nuclear war can do to you. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Steve Starr. You have the floor.
Well, thanks for allowing me to speak here. It's always a pleasure. I want to talk about the situation in Iran, and let's see if I can get my screen to work. Okay. We really are in a dangerous situation. I had thought for a long time that our most likely danger of nuclear war would come from the Ukraine conflict, but it seems now that we're poised on the verge of what could turn into a biblical Armageddon in the Middle East. I want to begin with a discussion, 2-minute clip from Scott Ritter. He is probably the best expert in military to sum up the military situation. Now, before this began, he described the movement of U.S. air defense systems into the Middle East, which have been accomplished during the period where the negotiations have been taking place. He considers the negotiations to be a screen for this movement. And I'll let him speak from there.
And some say by Saturday, we will have 2 carrier battle groups with approximately 160 combat aircraft, backed up by hundreds of American tactical fighters, fighter bombers, tankers,
Sorry, Steve.
warfare aircraft.
Could you pause it for a second because the video is not being shared on our end?
Really?
Why don't you exit your screen share and then go back and select the video clip that you had.
Okay.
And then
I'll
go
try
to
that
share again.
I'm not quite sure. I shared the screen.
In Zoom, there's a couple of, there you go. Now we can all see
Okay.
it.
Okay, I apologize for that.
No problem. No problem.
So let Mr. Ritter begin again.
And some say by Saturday, we will have 2 carrier battle groups with approximately 160 combat aircraft, backed up by hundreds of American tactical fighters, fighter bombers, tankers, electronic warfare aircraft, AWACS, the airborne early, the warning and control command post things. Basically, we have restructured our military posture in the Middle East to carry out a weeks-long air campaign that has a specific mission and kind of regime change. But it's also one that's linked to Israel's demands, Israel's requirement that we can't be hit by missiles in a sustained fashion. So look at the structure of the aircraft going in. I don't know if people do that. They tend to say, oh, this many, this many, this many. A lot of F-16s. The bulk of the F-16s are what they call wild weasel variants. These are suppression of enemy air defense. These are the aircraft that go in and take out enemy air defense. They're specifically trained. They have highly specialized equipment. The pilots are skilled in this operation. Why do we have so many wild weasels? Because normally you wouldn't be seeking to go in and directly interdict like that. If you're doing standoff attacks, you'd use other weapon systems to take out air defense. But this is going in to suppress the air defense so that we can control the skies over that territory. Why? Because we're going to impose aerial dominance over the ballistic missile operational areas of Iran up front. The idea here is to ensure that the Iranians will not be able to launch barrages of missiles. If any missiles get away, it'll be 1 or 2 sneaking out. Then we've got this new layered missile defense system that we think should be able to shoot it down. But even if it can't, the damage sustained by Israel or our bases will be minimal because it won't be a barrage. And we...
Okay. So Ritter has described, I think I need to stop the share again here and then go back to my PowerPoint. So Ritter has described the purpose of the U.S. strike. The U.S. believes it can go in, take out the Iranian air defense systems, and then destroy the ballistic missiles. Let's see, I got another prompt here. So the goal is to destroy the thousands of ballistic missiles that Iran has that pose a huge threat to Israel and American forces. Right now, the U.S. has moved 1/3 of its actively deployed fleet, the Navy has, into the Middle East. That's enormous. And in conjunction with that, we've moved hundreds of fighter planes. The carriers will carry probably about 160 fighters. And then in addition to that, we have moved hundreds of F-35s. Probably Larry Johnson said we've moved 7 squadrons, so 24 planes in each squadron. Ritter mentioned there's all sorts of F-16s, F-22s. We've also sent 6 of our 16th century airborne warning and control system AWACS planes to Europe, and they're being moved into the Middle East. And these will be used to coordinate a massive airstrike. And along with these, we also have probably about 20 to 30% of all our refueling tankers that will be used to refuel planes going back and forth to combat missions. The assumption is that we can take out their air defenses and destroy their missile bases with our planes. Meanwhile, as Helga mentioned, Iran and Russia had conducted joint military exercises. They are conducting them in the close proximity to the U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. In addition to that, Iran just conducted live fire exercises with Russia and China in the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil moves through on a daily basis. And very importantly, Alistair Crook has described this in detail recently. China has given Iran its long-range radar, the YCL-8B radar system, that can detect stealth aircraft at a range of 310 miles. Now, this is a big deal because the U.S. relies heavily on stealth. The assumption is that U.S. planes will be able to fly into Iran and be undetected and be able to hit their targets. I don't know if that's going to be the case. In January, Russia, China, and Iran signed a security agreement. What this means, I believe, is that Iran will be supplied with real-time targeting information from Russian and Chinese satellites, particularly Chinese, I think. This is important because they require that to live-time data to be able to hit naval vessels, planes, all of that. You know, it's a big deal. U.S. aircraft will be exposed and vulnerable if this is the case. So the assumption that the U.S. can just fly in and take out Iranian ballistic missiles, I think, will likely be shown to be a mistake. Now, Ritter doesn't necessarily agree with that, so he's kind of got more faith in the U.S. If attacked, Iran has vowed to launch a massive missile strike, a retaliatory strike against Israel, as well as U.S. bases and U.S. forces. Helga mentioned this. So in other words, I read today that Trump believes that he's thinking now that he can have a limited strike that will cause Iran to come to an agreement with the United States. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that Trump and his security team seem to listen to anybody except themselves. Iran, if they close the Strait of Hormuz, this is kind of the nuclear option as far as the world is concerned, without getting into nuclear war, at least. 20% of the world's oil means if that's shut off, and China relies very heavily on this oil, but oil prices will spike, and this won't be helpful to a re-election campaign or in the United States. It'll lead to a global economic disaster. So U.S. bases are on high alert for an attack by Iran. There's 40 to 50,000 U.S. troops in these bases. There's a lot more bases than this that are shown, but these are the largest ones. They're well within range of the Iranian missiles. And Iran could also choose to target oil refineries and all the facilities of the neighbors that are supporting more or less this attack: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain. You can see there's all sorts of targets, and they're well within range of the Iranian missiles. So how many missiles does Iran have? Well, in 2022, 3 years ago, a U.S. general stated that Iran had over 3,000 ballistic missiles, and that didn't include thousands of cruise missiles. I imagine they have more than that now, thousands. Now, these missiles are not sitting around on the surface. Iran has created what they call missile cities that are deeply buried underground in very hardened facilities. You can see some of these images here. These are huge facilities, and they're scattered all around Iran. These hardened missile cities, as I said, are spread across Iran, and they cannot be easily destroyed. This is a satellite photo from 2020. And you can see the various entrances. The first strike is supposedly going to come in. One of the analysts I read in Moon of Alabama suggests that about 200 cruise missiles will be launched initially. That'll be to take out the air defense systems, and then but a cruise missile can't take out these sites. It's not possible. These hardened sites, it doesn't have the warhead that could do it. If the missiles are removed from, Iran takes these missiles out of the tunnels. They're mounted on mobile launchers that also make them harder to locate and target, and they can be moved back in and out. So all across Iran, this is not a simple undertaking. Iran also has hypersonic missiles that travel 9,000 to 11,000 miles per hour, and they've been shown that they cannot be intercepted. And we saw this in October 2024. Our media said that these missiles were all intercepted, but I think you can see that that wasn't the case. This is 180 missiles. We'll multiply that times 20. This is why Israel requested that Iran stop its attack. Now, compare the countries. Iran dwarfs Israel in size and population. You can see on the map, Israel's little brown spot on the left. Iran is about 79 times larger than Israel, and it's got 10 times as many people as Israel does. 50% of Israelis live in 3 cities: Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's in terms of a war. It means that those 3 cities can be hit, and Israel could be devastated, its population, its ability to survive as a society. Now, Dr. Theodore Postel has created models. I use some of his slides here. This simulates an Iranian missile attack on Tel Aviv. This slide shows missile impact from 500 missiles, warheads with 1-ton warheads, and they have a CEP, a circular error probability, which means they're accurate plus or minus 1,000 yards. It means the accuracy is probably better than this, but this shows how they're scattered. The red dot shows the point of impact. The blue circle that's inside the yellow circle shows where surrounding structures will be damaged, and the yellow circle shows where interiors of buildings will be damaged but not destroyed. Now, this is a photo from Gaza. It gives you an idea. You can see in the center there's a direct hit of the building, and the damage from the hit at 30 to 40 meters distant, and another direct hit in the front. Multiply that times 500. This is a high resolution image of that same photo. You can see that there's all sorts of blasts here in the neighborhood. Now, imagine if you were there, you can see what it might look like. I was particularly upset when Israel destroyed the Al-Aqsa University in Gaza. 25,000 students studied there. Israel said there were tunnels underneath it, but if you happen to be in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa, this is something that you might be watching if this war takes place. And you can see up in the left-hand corner what was left of the university after this attack. Now, this is a 500 one-ton warheads on Tel Aviv with a 500-meter accuracy, plus or minus 500 yards. And you can see that they're much more tightly gathered. And it's utter devastation. The Gaza Strip covers 140 square miles, 363 square kilometers. Tel Aviv covers 20 square miles or 51 square kilometers. So the area there is it's much smaller. So you group all those 500 warheads and you're going to have a scenario similar to this. Well, will Israel accept that? If the U.S. fails to take out the Iranian ballistic missiles and Iran launches the massive strike that is promised, that's what we'll see. Let's talk about Israeli nuclear weapons. You know, for decades, the United States has pretended that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons because under U.S. law, foreign aid is prohibited to nations outside the nuclear non-proliferation treaty that if they possess these nuclear weapons, we're not supposed to deal with them. Well, Israel is not a member of the NTP, but Iran is. So we've got a little backwards here. And the issue of how many nuclear weapons Israel has probably will be disputed. You can look at some sources and say that Israel has 90 nuclear weapons. Well, in 1991, the Pentagon published studies that said that Israel had 90 to 300 nuclear warheads. And I don't think they've stopped building them for the last 25 years. So I would suggest they have hundreds of nuclear weapons and they're deployed on missiles, submarines, and aircraft. Now, even if somehow you manage to take out all the missiles and the bombers, Israel also has 5 German diesel Dolphin subs, and each of these subs can carry 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles that are armed with 200 kiloton warheads. A kiloton is 100,000 tons of TNT equivalent, so 200,000 tons of TNT equivalent explosive power, and they have a range of 1,500 kilometers or 930 miles. So, it's, you know, anyway, you get the idea. So what are the possible outcomes of a U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran? Well, the desired outcome from the United States and Israel is that they want to bring about regime change. That's the point of this. They will be targeting the Ayatollah and all the leadership people in Iran with their initial attack. They hope to fragment Iran, break it up as a nation, and destroy their ballistic missiles. And this will mean the end of Iranian power. And under these circumstances, the U.S. will suffer losses, but will be seen as a winner. I guess that's what Trump would be hoping for if he's foolish enough to start this war. However, what if Iranian air defenses prevent U.S. air dominance? In that case, the U.S. will not be able to destroy these ballistic missiles, and certainly not almost within a matter of an hour or two. Iran can launch a massive ballistic missile attack against Israel and U.S. forces. In that case, U.S. military bases will be hit, many U.S. aircraft will be downed, U.S. ships will be sunk, and the U.S. will suffer a huge loss. This will be the massive defeat that shows the inability of the United States to have the dominance that it thinks it has. If Israel is devastated by the Iranian attack, which it looks to me like it would be based on Dr. Postal's images, they have what they call the Samson option, which means they just shoot nuclear weapons at just about everybody. And they seem to have the ability to do that. Now, I don't know. That's crossing the line where you have Russia and China there. Russia certainly doesn't want to have a nuclear war on its border, the fallout coming across. And they just were doing military exercises with Iran and China. So, that's an open question about how they will respond. And if Iran shuts off the Strait of Hormuz, this brings about a global economic chaos. It's likely that regional war would result in possibly a world war. So we're in a very dangerous situation now. And I pray that this won't come about. But, Trump has moved so many so many military forces into the region that, even if Israel could start this war with an attack right now, and the U.S. would be forced to follow. And Netanyahu certainly wants this. So I really think Trump has got himself into a corner, and we are likely to see a war break out. And we certainly don't want a nuclear war. My contention for years has been that there's no political or national goals that are worth risking the destruction of most human and animal life on Earth, and that's what we would be looking at if we get into a full-fledged nuclear war. So let's we're in a dangerous situation, but it's almost like a biblical Armageddon that we're approaching, and you know, let's hope this doesn't happen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steve Starr, for that. That definitely adds a lot of clarity to what's happening with this. I'm sure I'm going to get a number of messages of people asking for your slides. So if you wouldn't mind emailing them over to me, I'm sure people would love to use them. And we'll also make sure to take a short of what you presented today for people to distribute as well.
Hopefully you can edit out the problems I had with Dr.
There was no problems. This wasn't no, please don't worry about that. That was not a problem at all. I think everybody understands. No, yeah, so that was very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Steve Starr, for that. And we'll continue to organize with this material. If you are able to stay on, I'm sure there's questions that are coming in.
Sure, I'd be
So we'll
glad.
go through the rest of our agenda and then we'll come back.
Okay.
But next, I'd like to bring in Eduardo Gabriel Fernandez. He's a graduate of the advanced course in national defense, member of the General Jorge Edgar Leal Argentine Sovereignty Monitoring Center. And we greatly appreciate you joining us today for the discussion. Please go ahead, Mr. Fernandez. You have the floor. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the International Peace Coalition, defenders of human rights and global justice. As a member of the General Jorge Edgar Leal Observatory of Argentine Sovereignty, I address you with an urgent and humanitarian appeal, an appeal on behalf of the Argentine people who are suffering, who are confused, and who find no answers from their current leadership. Today, at this critical moment, I'll present figures that are not cold statistics, but rather a reflection of the human suffering caused by a planned and deliberate economic collapse. We analyze these indicators through the lens of physical economy, a view shared by Juan Domingo Perón and Little LaRouche in different times. This is an approach that places human dignity above all else. From our observatory, we promote policies to develop this real economy, which is not financial speculation or debt imposed by international oligarchs, but it is rather the sovereign capacity of a nation to improve the lives of its citizens through massive investments in infrastructure, abundant and clean energy, science, and technology, investments that multiply productivity and also guarantee social justice. We grant new value to scientific and artistic creativity, studying great universal discoveries in humanist poetry, to awaken in every citizen that divine spark of reason, of truth and beauty that transcends everyday events. Humanist economics measures progress not only in material figures, but also in society's capacity to feed, to protect, and to empower its people, combating the financial parasitism that perpetuates inequality and suffering. With that in mind, let us examine with empathy and rigor the key figures from 2020 to 2025, focusing on what touches the heart: access to basic food and the fight against poverty. Perón taught that work is both a right and a duty, because everyone should produce at least as much as they consume. But how can we sustain a dignified society when, at the beginning of the pandemic, thousands of businesses and jobs were lost, with industrial capacity operating as low as 60%, even less than that? Worse still, under anarcho-liberal policies, without the pandemic as an excuse, the debacle continued with massive closures. More than 20,000 additional businesses have been destroyed since 2023. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost, and installed capacity has fallen to less than 60%. Some calculations place installed capacity at 53.8% in December of 2025, the lowest level of the year. The effect on food is devastating. Beef consumption, a historical pillar of our nutrition, dropped from 50 kilograms during the pandemic to 48 kilograms currently, reflecting economic constraints that deprive many families of essential protein. Milk consumption recovered somewhat after the pandemic, and now we're back at the same situation: 185 liters per year. Bread, a staple food for the poor, has suffered drastic drops in actual consumption due to price increases and austerity measures. These setbacks are exacerbated by poverty, although official data from INDEC, the official data agency, show a 31.6 decrease in the first half of 2025 after previous high peaks. Extreme poverty persists at alarming levels, around 7%, according to the most optimistic sources. Other sources, the more pessimistic ones, state that it's about 10%, which affects millions who live under very dire conditions. These are not just numbers, they're malnourished children, mothers rationing food, and the elderly choosing between medicine and food. The potential rate of population density erodes. In misery, there is no reproduction, no education, no innovation. This is a Malthusian economic genocide against the very essence of humanity. The political core of this is clear. The government of Javier Milei is connected with anti-human forces denounced by the Schiller Institute. His amoral and violent rhetoric, such as talk of Vaseline-coated children, evokes disturbing echoes of the elitist abuses like Epstein's. And in a mire of figures in those circles, he promotes a savage free market approach that tolerates and accepts exploitation. He's an heir to the views of von Mises and Hayek. He embodies the Anglo-Saxon oligarchy, the City of London, Tavistock, the Club of Rome, which uses deindustrialization, population control, and privatizations against progress. His shock policies are drastic cuts, handing over lithium, oil, strategic minerals, and land to foreigners, dismantling the welfare state with fabricated external debt and capital flight that impoverish us and destroy our lives. As if that weren't enough, yesterday a labor reform was pushed through that takes us back to the beginning of the 20th century. And as if that were not enough either, Milei wants to send Argentine troops to Gaza to complete the genocide, working with the Zionist government of Israel. This is clearly an assault on humanism, and it is a complete break with a diplomacy that for a long time respected non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. However, Peronist doctrine profoundly coincides with LaRouche's view. Perón's organized community, the state, workers, business owners, and society in harmony for social justice and development, resonates with a physical economy that invests in ambitious projects against speculation. Both reject rampant individualism and parasitism, promoting instead an organization that elevates dignity through decent work, education, and scientific technological sovereignty. This is not the first crisis that Argentina has faced: suffocating debt, inflation, deindustrialization. But the only way out is sovereign with strategic investment, national unity, and solidarity with other peoples who think and feel the same way as we do. Since at the heart of our political will is to prioritize and wholeheartedly support all proposals and forces that drive for a true civilizational shift, which we understand as the transition to a multipolar, inclusive, and humanist world order that definitively breaks with the unipolar dominance of the Anglo-Saxon financial empire and its obsolete institutions. This civilizational shift is not merely a geopolitical readjustment, but a profound transformation that promotes sovereign cooperation among nations, progressive de-dollarization, radical reforms in multilateral governance, such as the United Nations and the Security Council, an end to Malthusian austerity, and the prioritization of physical development projects that raise human productivity, and at the same time raise the potential rate of population density and the collective well-being above speculation and parasitism. This is not a utopia. It is a historical solution that has worked before, and it will work now. We call for global solidarity. Let us unite against financial empire. General Leal, the hero of Operation 90, who raised our Argentine flag at the South Pole, reminds us sovereignty is an inalienable right. Return the Malvinas Islands. They are ours by virtue of Spain's legal continuity. No more imperialism, no more militarization of the South Atlantic, or theft of our resources. Thank you to the Schiller Institute for being a beacon in this march. Therefore, as an observatory, as an organization, we are committed to disseminating, promoting, and defending this humanist vision of physical economy by promoting the International Peace Coalition. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank the Schiller Institute and thank all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez, for your presentation. I think this was very eye-opening to many people to hear what's really happening to Argentina. We greatly appreciate this and you standing and working with us towards our common goals. So thank you so much, and please stay on for the discussion. We have one other person that we're going to bring in, which is Jose Vega, who is running for Congress in the Bronx against Richie Torres. I understand you just put out a video recently, and you're going to be doing a number of events, and you're going into petitioning to get yourself on the ballot, which is absolutely fantastic. And we definitely need more people like yourself running for Congress and standing up. Please go ahead, Jose.
Yeah, thank you. First, can we start with that video? Are we able to go right to that? Okay, I think we are. Why does Israel possess hundreds of undeclared nuclear weapons while facing virtually no international scrutiny? For decades, successive U.S. administrations have invoked nuclear non-proliferation as a casus belli against Middle Eastern nations. The Bush administration, alongside Tony Blair's government, relied on a forged document claiming that Saddam Hussein had purchased yellowcake uranium from Niger and was violating UN sanctions to build weapons of mass destruction. These were lies, yet they led directly to the invasion of Iraq and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime. Now add the recent unprovoked June 13th attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, along with the familiar narrative justifying yet another preemptive strike in a targeted effort to overthrow the Iranian government. But this raises a deeper question. Why was Israel permitted to develop its nuclear weapons at all? And why were intelligence agencies so incompetent or so unwilling in assessing its true scope? The so-called Epstein files reveal not only the depravity of the transatlantic political and financial elite, but also hint at how figures like Robert Maxwell may have fit into this. Maxwell, the British publisher and father of Ghislaine Maxwell, was an ardent Zionist with close ties to British intelligence and the Israeli Mossad. Journalist Seymour Hersh detailed much of this history in The Samson Option, which exposed Israel's nuclear weapons program. According to Hersh, Maxwell and Daily Mirror foreign editor Nicholas Davies conspired with Mossad to kidnap and silence Mordecai Vanunu, an Israeli engineer at the secret Dimona nuclear facility who had smuggled out documents revealing the extent of Israel's nuclear arsenal. Maxwell died just a week after The Samson Option was published, or as Jeffrey Epstein later phrased it in a newly released email, had been passed away. Epstein claimed that Maxwell had threatened Mossad, demanding $400 million to save his collapsing empire, or else he would expose the agency's deepest secrets. Epstein wrote that Maxwell had free access to Margaret Thatcher's Downing Street, Ronald Reagan's White House, the Kremlin, and the corridors of power throughout Europe. According to Epstein, Maxwell passed sensitive information to Mossad in exchange for protection and indulgence of his excessive and lavish lifestyle. Needless to say, I oppose shadow governments, intelligence agencies, and deep state actors. Whether Maxwell, Epstein, or others who manipulate public policy and lay the groundwork for permanent wars, we must declare independence from the Epstein class. You can donate to me and declare your independence today.
All right. Thank you for playing that, and thank you for having me here. One of the reasons we made that video is because you have to put things in a sort of perspective. A lot of this is happening before I'm born. The Samson Option book comes out in 1991, I believe, and that is also when George Galloway reads sections of it into the parliament and puts it in the record. And then just 15 days later, Robert Maxwell would be dead. Now think about that. That's also 10 years before 9/11. I'm born in 1998. What this is telling me is that a lot of world events that have shaped my life, the course of my life and my circumstances and my environment have been because of these kinds of scandalous events that have all happened, that I didn't choose to happen. I didn't make happen. It's just, the product of where I was born, right? And that is, in essence, what we are doing here with the campaign in the Bronx. Look at this now. Look at the people who are being born now, right? And they are not conscious of the fact that we are about to possibly go to war again with Iran, a country that has 90 million people as its population. And we are about to doom not only them, not only the American people, but generations to come who will feel the ramifications of this, who had nothing to do with the decision-making process. That is where we find ourselves in right now. And why is it then, therefore, that we have been in such a fight here in the Bronx? Well, a lot of people may know, but if you don't know, my opponent is Richie Torres. He is a congressman here in the United States. He speaks at the House of Representatives. The last time that we were on the equal amount of tension with Iran was when we actually did that strike. And this was Richie Torres's justification that he was openly putting out in June of 2025. He said, "Who would have thought the one issue uniting the far left and the far right is antipathy for the world's only Jewish state and sympathy for the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism? There are voices in our politics who would gladly see Iran acquire a nuclear bomb if it meant freeing Palestine from the river to the sea." A catastrophic attack on Israel is an attack on all. And so there are numerous statements like that justifying this strike that President Trump did on Iran. He has also been, of course, silent, however, in the last few days. Now, here's the thing, right? We are in a position here in the Bronx running against him in the Democratic primary where we present such a threat, not even necessarily to unseat him, because these events that are happening right now are happening months before the actual election that will happen in June and subsequently in November. No, we actually have an ability to intervene on the events that are happening right now. Okay, if we are loud now and we just start saying we are the opposition to the war in Iran, and people start equating that with us as an option in the Bronx, people will see that as an intervention against what is happening right now, meaning we can actually not only impact but guide decisions simply from the position that we as American citizens find ourselves in now, which is why there have been nasty articles written about me personally, and written about the campaign, equating me as an anti-Semite, and of course my association with the LaRouche organization. And there will be subsequent attempts on my friend Diane Sayre, who's running for US president, to do the same thing by labeling her as an anti-Semite. All because we believe in a policy of mutual development. And we believe that true world peace is completely possible. We are holding the Congress accountable for its responsibility to stop war. It is the Congress, not the president, that has the power to declare war. Where is the Congress? I have to be that leadership, since others will not take it. And if you want to help us intervene on that process, you can help by joining at votevega.nyc. If you're an American citizen who can donate to our campaign, please do so. If you want to be boots on the ground and help us talk to our neighbors here about the truth of who actually represents them, you can go to votevega.nyc and help us today. So that's it. Thank you kindly for having me on.
Thank you, Jose, for joining us today. It was definitely really great to have you on, and definitely let's share your link in the chat for people to go check out your website. And if you are in the United States and you'd like to assist the campaign, they're definitely looking for people to help doing your petitioning. So please go out and volunteer if you're available. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to come back to the panelists, and I want to bring in Dennis Speed as well, who's the co-moderator of the International Peace Coalition, and include him in the discussion period. I want to see if you have any reflections or thoughts on what's been said and discussed so far.
Well, I'll just say this. I think Helga's opening statement, and in how she was characterizing things, it reminded me of something she actually had said, not in this statement, but I think it was in the webcast that she did, or podcast, excuse me, on Wednesday. And she was talking about a particular professor from Columbia University, I think it was, Adam Tooze, Tooze. And he had what he tried to do is to describe the seemingly bottomless degeneracy of the Epstein class as being not different than, as we can see in the emails, their discussions of foreign policy or science or economics. And Helga said at the time, she talked about how they would entrap these young women. They talk about that in the same breath as they talk about business with the International Monetary Fund or, military matters and so on. I think what's important about this is to understand that whether you're talking about the boardroom, the war room, or the bedroom, there's a predatory mindset. And this predatory mindset, which was characterized, I guess, by Vladimir Putin as the vampire's ball. I think that also Maria Zakharova referred to the same idea, in which the idea is somehow there's something, some substance, whether there's oil or whether it's energy or whether it's something else, that's being somehow that's the reason we're going to war. But there's another issue, I think, which people have to think about, which is the outlook, the mental outlook, the way that these people see human beings. Um, and I think that's really what we're looking at here. We're seeing a conflict between two views of mankind. Schiller put it from the standpoint of the comparison between the Spartan society of Lycurgus and the Athenians' society under Solon of Athens, one which was actually ruled by reason. And I don't want to slander the Spartans because I don't think you're looking at with the transatlantic sector anything remotely that socially conscious, frankly. You're looking at something far more dangerous. But I think what you see in the arrest yesterday of Andrew is something that is important. And while it's true that he was not arrested for the crimes he committed against the powerless, but rather because of the fact that his trading with insider information might have affected the business class and so on. While that's true, the last time a royal was arrested was 1647. It's Charles I. And therefore, what has happened is that the mantle of heaven, or you want to call it that, has temporarily been challenged on behalf of the royals. I think that's significant, not just in terms of England, but in terms of the idea of the madness that is characteristic of these moves. Notice that Helga talked about it as being that the Iran thing, not as being some great tactically ingenious or brilliant approach, but that this thing is actually characterized by madness. I have a question, I think, for Steve in particular here, and just to ask him, because you saw what Jose had to say. You made some references also to the Israeli nuclear capability. But from your standpoint, in looking at this question of miscalculation in nuclear war, how do you think this factor of mindset comes into it? You know, there's one thing to talk about the technology and what's possible and who may be able to counterstrike whom, but what about the factor of the mentality?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I would say that hubris is playing a huge role in all this. The U.S. has been used to being the dominant military power, and we have a huge nuclear arsenal, and Israel is used to being the only nuclear power in the Middle East, and they have a large nuclear arsenal, probably half as large as the Chinese. And, Israel, I worry about them. Look at what they've done in Gaza. I mean, they've been creating, it's a genocide, and the U.S. has supported it. And so that mindset to me is, you couple that with nuclear weapons, it's incredibly dangerous. I wouldn't see Israel having any reluctancy using its nuclear weapons against Iran if its cities are being obliterated by a large barrage of ballistic missiles. And the United States, if they lose a carrier, there's 5,000 U.S. Troops or sailors on an aircraft carrier. We're going to have two of them. They may be keeping them out of range of Iranian missiles, but if they do that, the aircraft on the carriers won't be able to hit targets very deep inside Iran because they're limited by their own range. So what happens if the U.S. loses a couple of carriers? Trump sees 10,000 dead Americans at the bottom of the seas. Will he use nuclear weapons? It's quite clear to me that these missile cities that Iran has are not going to be destroyed by Tomahawk missiles. That's why they want to fly all these planes in to bomb the hell out of them. But I think that we're going to see the air defense systems blocking these attacks. And well, I guess I don't want to get too long-winded to answer, but no, I think that the mindset is arrogance and hubris, and the assumption that maybe Iran is weak and they can't defend against it. So that all lends itself to using nuclear weapons at some point if Iran proves to be much more formidable than the U.S. believes it is.
And actually, Eduardo, I would actually pose that same question to you, except a little bit differently, because Helga referenced the fact that no sub-Saharan African country was even invited to join the Board of Peace. But also often in these discussions that happen is there's always sort of this thing where there's NATO and there's the transatlantic, and basically three-quarters of the human race is often left out when the matters of strategic import for the whole world are discussed. What's your view, Eduardo, given also what you had to say there on the questions of economy, of this, of the importance of the idea of mindset, not merely from the standpoint of the negative, the obvious predatory mindset, but having a higher ordered mindset that would actually address the solution concept to these problems?
Si tuviéramos esta mentalidad,
Yes,
la
if we would
República
have that
Argentina
mentality,
claramente
the
estaría,
Argentinian
primero, no
Republic
intervendría en
would not
una coalición
intervene,
como la que plantea
mainly in
Trump.
a situation as
Argentina
Trump is
históricamente,
presenting.
por cuestiones
Argentina
internacionales, su
historically,
diplomacia
because of
siempre fue
international
una
situation,
diplomacia de la no injerencia en
its
asuntos de otros
diplomacy
estados.
has been the no
Y el
interference
caso
in
de que
the
alguna vez
affairs of
intervino
other countries.
fue
In the
con los cascos
case,
blancos,
uh,
cosa que no es
in
el
some
caso en este
cases
caso.
of the UN,
Entonces,
intervene with the
creemos que no
white
solamente
helmets. So
la
we
situación es
believe
compleja,
that the
sino que
situation
además,
is
estando en las condiciones en
complex,
que estamos,
but in the conditions we are,
podríamos ser parte
we could
de
become part
blancos de países
of,
con los cuales históricamente nunca tuvimos ningún tipo de
we could be
inconvenientes,
we could be targets of countries with countries that we never had problems. In the case of Russia, China, South Africa, I think is a we are going backwards in the diplomacy, but also in the international relations. And in Milei, his policy is not a new policy, but it's a policy that has been cyclical. We had it with the coup d'etat that we had in Argentina. We had the dictatorship of 1976, and they were there was a change of in ideology, but also the mentality was different, and they imposed that type of system. And after that dictatorship, we had the Malvinas War, and also we have a Versailles as the Germans at Versailles Treaty, which happened with Carlos Menem in 1990 in the agreements, in the agreement of Madrid 1 and 2, where Argentina abandons its sovereignty. It's not the first time. With Mauricio Macri, we have the same, where there was a credit from the IMF that it shouldn't have been requested, because Argentina, even though it is part of the IMF, it shouldn't request such a credit. And now we have that again with Javier Milei. So that means that if governments, liberal governments, in quotations, because they are not liberal at all, they are neocolonial governments, as we see and understand. These neocolonial governments, they want to make Argentina to abandon its mentality, and they follow the model of Tavistock during 50 years that has been creating the ideology of the Argentinian society. So Argentina is under fire, and in one side, the economy is being destroyed, And in the other side, the human beings are being degraded as human beings. And today, in many of the countries, is now fashion, is fashionable. The Therians and these Therians that they dress as animals and behave as animals. And after that, they go to the government and act like animals, or they treat us as animals, or they believe they can treat us as animals. So I think that in that sense, there is a lot of work to do. There is a lot to fix. The political leadership is not the best. And I believe the Schiller Institute and with everybody, we can together generate a critical mass to change that sense.
Okay. Very good. So, Anastasia, I think that Dennis was saying that oh, there he is.
Yeah, I can jump in. This is Dennis Small.
Okay.
I think that what Eduardo is talking about in Argentina is highly relevant for the entire strategic situation, because unfortunately, Argentina is a model of the kind of devastation in countries in the global south that this predatory mindset that was referenced is planned across the globe. Argentina was a relatively highly industrialized country back in the 1960s and 1970s, as advanced as South Korea, and under governments of Perón in particular, but also then later the Kirchners accomplished significant industrial development. The current Milei government in particular has been designed in the witch's den of the Epstein class to produce an absolute butchery of a country which has played a crucial role historically, including Argentina's development of nuclear energy, along with Brazil and Mexico, the only three countries in Ibero-America to have developed nuclear energy, and with tremendous advances as well in the field of rocketry and space and so on and so forth. So this is not only a horror for Argentina, it is meant as a bloody example for the world. This is the sort of thing that Henry Kissinger was always very fond of doing. Now, I'd like to just take the opportunity to add in a dimension of this strategic situation, which we have discussed here before, but bring it up to date. You may recall that when the January 3rd invasion of Venezuela occurred and the kidnapping of President Maduro, we warned that this was a indication of a major phase change underway internationally. That is to say, there was a shift in the entire approach, not to Venezuela, but to world events, along with what had just happened with the London-led Ukrainian drone attack on President Putin's residence in Novgorod. And that was followed very quickly, unfortunately confirming our analysis, with the genocidal attack on Cuba. It's irrelevant what you may think about the Cuban government. What's going on now is an illegal policy of economic strangulation and warfare, which is exactly what was done to Gaza, with the difference that there's not a war at this point in Cuba, but this is the attempted strangulation going on. You can't cut off energy supplies to Cuba without reducing the population in the kind of Malthusian genocide that Eduardo was discussing with us. Now, there's a new element here, just so it's on people's radar screen, which is there is a big push to now dollarize the countries of the region. That is to say, to make the dollar the official currency, to eliminate the national currencies in countries like Argentina. And Argentina is one of the first countries they're going to try to do this because Milei is in favor of it. Now, if that happens, it means that that country no longer has sovereignty. It doesn't control its own money. It can't have credit. And it has subjected itself to the $2.4 quadrillion debt hanging around the dollar. So this is something to keep your eye on. It is what is going to be occurring in the period immediately ahead, perhaps starting with Venezuela, then Argentina, and then other countries. Now, one final point, which is that when the attack on Venezuela first occurred, you may recall that in discussing that, I said that the only way to understand what happened in Venezuela was to turn your gaze 1,700 miles to the south, to Peru. Because the reason for Venezuela was that the plan was to get rid of any influence of China and Russia, but especially China and the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. And that the next target was going to be the Chancay port in Peru, jointly developed by Peru and by China, and its potential to link up with a bioceanic railroad to Brazil. This week, what we have seen is the overthrow of the government of Peru. President Geri was removed with one of these classical Congress corruption scandal type of things. He is accused of corruption in his relations with Chinese business interests. So the target on this is exactly what we said. It was exactly 1,700 miles to the south of Venezuela. And the overall game plan in this thing, I'm bringing in the Ibero-American feature of this because the overall game plan of, let's call it the Epstein class, the City of London and the predatory financial interests, is to guarantee that there is no alternative to Satanism in economics and personal life. The Chinese role will be eliminated, not just in Ibero-America, but around the world, and to be able to impose their will the way Leviathan's will is imposed on a fragmented population. It doesn't work so easily. And not only do we have the issues that Steve has raised around Iran, but inside the countries of Ibero-America, such as in Argentina, there is a very strong reservoir, as there is in the United States, of opposition to these policies. And I think the strategic significance of what Eduardo has spoken to us about today is that it shows, for people who don't know, that there are people in Argentina and political forces in Argentina, as there are in Brazil and in Mexico and Peru and in other countries of the global south, who are the natural allies of those of us in the United States and Europe who are intent on changing this overall security and development architecture, and who will be present and will participate with us in the upcoming March 2nd meeting.
Great. Thank you very much, Dennis. And thank you, everyone, for the discussion. We do want to make the transition now to the Q&A period. Unless, Dennis, you wanted to post these posters before we do that.
Well, no, I think that the one thing I would say, however, is I believe that Carell is with us. He may have something that may be pertinent to our broader audience. I guess I'm sort of asking. I know because we often do a transition, so we can do either one. And the posters we can certainly use later. We don't need them in this.
Well, why don't we bring in Carell, and then Carell, I know there's a new petition that was just posted, and we're bringing in Carell to describe what that is. I can post it in the chat for people, but why don't you go ahead and kick off?
But before we bring him in, let's just note that he's a longtime troublemaker from Paris who has the ability to suddenly provoke important matters of thinking, which is why we've asked him to come on here. And I think he's got a few things to say pertaining to this Epstein matter, which is not an Epstein matter, correct?
It's I would call it the new generation of the children of Satan, which came out as our friend Little LaRouche identified out of the cybernetics program of Norbert Wiener, and the people who started thinking that you could decouple the brain from the bodies. And once the bodies got crazy in their own way, and the minds got even crazier without the body, and and now they have created this monster Epstein, which is only it's a kind of symptom, it's so we really have to, the thing is the Epstein people should be arrested, but the people who created them, and we are still walking around, I think about, what's his name, John Brockman, and others, or he's 85, he was one of the main impresarios of the counterculture in the US, which and then spread all over the world. He was friends with Andy Warhol and the so-called factory, which was producing mainly heroin addicts in New York. And this is so the thing is, these people, and he was what's officially called the enabler of Epstein, because he set up a foundation called the Edge Foundation, because he was before a literary agent, and he reached out to many scientists, and then they got hooked into Epstein, which had its own transhumanism agenda, while in the same time Epstein was paying all the bills for this elite club where Nobel Prize winner Kurzweil, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all these people, the billionaires and the so-called transhumanists, which is a new name for modern eugenics, which we used to call race science, which is supremacy theories. So we're talking about colonialism. Colonialism is not only some economic madness, it is also a cultural matrix, which is deep-rooted in slavery and the worst aspects of the most degraded history of mankind. And this became a kind of culture, which is obviously coming together again today because the financial system is going bankrupt, and colonialism and Schacht are back on the agenda. So it's not by accident that the colonial culture of transhumanism is in the same time becoming dominant again. So we will have in written forms more details of things which are a little bit too long and too complicated to be exposed. So what I want to bring up is, because it's kind of a breakthrough and the type of breakthrough we all will be happy with for the International Peace Coalition, because we have an independent group of people based in Belgium, also in France, which through various ways we have been reaching out to, and they qualify themselves as a group of citizens of the world alarmed and outraged by political violence, societal setbacks, and ecological disasters. And they have made a call, which has been signed by Odile for the Schiller Institute France, by Jacques Cheminade for Solidarity and Progress Party, by Christine Bière, who is the chief editor of the Nouvelle Solidarité monthly magazine, and also Helga mentioned this call last time of the IPC. So the call itself has been posted as a petition on change.org. It was launched by the head of this group, who is Elizabeth Martens, and it's addressed to the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, and all representatives of the UN member states. And the text is quite short, so I can read it now. The title is, "We, citizens of our respective nation states and citizens of the world, under the aegis of the UN, we do not want war. We, the undersigned, we request an immediate reactivation of the UN Charter in its 1945 version so that it acts as a platform for sovereign nation states based on the principles of peaceful coexistence and multilateral cooperation, as well as the immediate reactivation of respect for the principle of equal rights of peoples and their right to self-determination. So you can discuss it, but we still have something around which is the Charter of the UN, which is not the right of the. This is not the right makes might. This is international law. This is not a rule-based order of the most powerful people, which are putting the world in slavery. This is international law. So we, the undersigned, we denounce the systematic violations of international law and repeated aggressions against national sovereignties, cases of Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Sudan, Palestine, Venezuela, Somalia, Cuba, and so on, through the illegal use of sanctions and conditionalities by the United States and its allies, which together have become the greatest dangers to the planet and the greatest challenge of life, democracy, and universal peace. Therefore, we have a formal request. We call upon the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and all representatives of UN member states. What do we ask them? We want a comprehensive reform of the UN, including its Security Council, to achieve more equitable geographical representation in global decision-making processes. In the name of the UN Charter and the principle of multilateralism stated therein, we demand that each member country effectively count as one in order to better respect the current architecture of international relations, which means a new UN, which is in line with the global majority or the BRICS or the global South, whatever you want to call it. We want the immediate cessation of interference by Western countries, the United States and its allies, in nations not conforming to their worldview and transforming the principles of multilateralism of the UN Charter into a unipolar world, thereby multiplying crises, promoting instability, the decline of social gains, poverty, the explosion of social inequalities, intolerance, ostracism. We want the taking into account of the security concern of each sovereign nation with the immediate and unconditional prohibition of economic, political, cultural sanctions, and the immediate and unconditional prohibition of the use of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. We're also calling for an immediate reorientation of all arms credits and all bank financing granted to the defense industry towards the development of nations taking into account their specific needs to fight poverty, to develop healthcare, education, science, and culture, as well as towards the fight against global warming, the preservation of the environment, and biodiversity. Concluding statement, we, citizens of our respective nation states and citizens of the world, under the aegis of the United Nations, we do not want war. We shout loud and clear, we do not want war. We want to preserve peace and international order based on multilateralism and international law, recognized in the principles of the charters of the United Nations. End of the call, which we will put in the chat. So far my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karel. And I did put that link in the chat for people to go check that out. As people saw, I signed within a second while Karel was reading it. So please definitely take a look. And we had a sort of discussion some weeks back about it when you guys were first getting this initiative going. So it's wonderful to see that it's been posted and that things are in motion around it. Be great to get more and more signatures on it. So thank you very much, Karel. And I think we probably should talk about having you on the IPC in the future, very near future, to have a more a substantial discussion around the cultural questions.
Pour la paix pour discuter de la question.
Excuse me, French, you're in the wrong channel.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay. And then so last thing though, I think what we're just thinking about time. Dennis, we can show those posters quickly and then I'll make the announcement to transition.
I think we should go to the questions because I have a couple things for Carell. I'll just well, we can do the one on Epstein just because it'd be useful for people. If you have that, if the British intelligence thing, if not, it's not a big deal. This one is nice too, since what Carell just said. This is from a report, October 22nd. This is what I was going to ask him about when we got to the Q&A. All right, this just came out. I want people to have an understanding. Everybody has heard about the Epstein, New Mexico ranch. You were probably hearing about it, about the experiments and about the idea that they are trying to create a master race. This is a document, 2022, from public eugenics to private eugenics. What does the future hold? And I'm only going to indicate by reading a few sentences what kind of world we're actually in when we're talking about the vampire's ball character of the Epstein writ large phenomenon, because it's a much different phenomenon than people have heard. Traditional public eugenics, which was ordered by the state, has been replaced by a kind of private eugenics conducted by parents using reproductive techniques, genetic testing, and eventually in the future, genetic engineering. While traditional eugenics strive to improve the species, the new model aims to satisfy parents' reproductive aspirations. The association between public and private eugenics is an ongoing issue, mostly due to its relation to Nazi eugenics. Normally, we would capitalize the word Nazi. They chose not to here. This paper will state that both are eugenics, however, with different characteristics and thus worthy of different legal and ethical assessments. Now, the reason for reading that is that under this ostensible, sophistical cover, what has been done and what was being done by Epstein and others, many others, some of which you will come to mind as you think about it, is that this idea of the golden billion that was talked about by Vladimir Putin called attention to it, but Lyndon LaRouche many years ago talked about the idea that the overall sort of conception of the Malthusians, what he called the baby doomers, was to reduce the population of the world by as much as 6 billion. He used to talk about the idea of a genocide 100 times worse than Hitler, but actually it's 1,000 times worse. You can say that that's mad, but when you look at what we found and what we're finding, not merely in terms of the policies around war and the policies toward nations like Argentina, nations like Venezuela, nations like Cuba, but when you look at what we are seeing in the emails, the sort of free associative quality of it all, particularly when you have Steve Bannon in these discussions with Jeffrey Epstein, which is a truly macabre Addams Family kind of moment. It's clear that we are dealing with something far sicker and far more important that we expose to people. The involvement of Noam Chomsky and others, Marvin Minsky and others for that matter, in around the circles of Epstein has also highlighted that. So I think that's the only one of these I'd like to indicate here. And I think maybe in the Q&A, I have a particular question I'd like to pose to Carell, but I think there is probably better because we want to transition. Yeah. A lot of people have questions and a lot of people therefore I'll get in line with everybody else.
Yeah, get in line, Dennis. It's pretty hard to get Dennis in line. All right, great. Well, so what we'll do is if you're watching over Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, X, or wherever this is being broadcast right now, and you'd like to participate in the discussion period, you must be registered to do that. And you can do that by either going to the YouTube description and you'll find the link for the RSVP page there and you'll receive the Zoom invitation. If you do not see that Zoom and that in the description period, you can go to schillerinstitute.com, and right on the top of the website is the RSVP page. And with that, we will cut the live stream and continue.